and I was going to be intentional in how I do things. Now, I use these words now. I certainly didn't use them then. So, MOPS was a big thing. And then we started this cell group, which we called a koinonia. I guess different cell groups you could identify in different labels, like Al-Qaeda, I suppose, would be a different cell group. But starting a cell group where you can then have transparency. People can know who you are. They can hold you accountable. They can introduce ideas to you. Where you can have Bible studies. Those are the sorts of things where we then started to figure things out. And you know, at 29, I wasn't super mature. At 49, my wife might debate that maturity level now, but at 29, I had a lot of growing to do. You know, as a father of one, and then soon a father of two, and then Kevin came along. So I had a lot of, in order to lead my family, I had a lot of growing up to do, and my friends and I together as a group, we sort of figured out what that was all about. So koinonia group. As I said, life kind of accumulates. You have this thing that leads to this thing that leads to this thing. And from our cell group, our koinonia group, the Burtons, who have been at this church for a long time, they introduced the idea of growing kids God's way to us. Wow. One of those just lights into the darkness things for us, our family. We did it, hadn't heard anything about it. We were still sort of, we'd gone to Love and Logic, Parenting with Love and Logic, and that was okay. And then we went to this 16-week course of Growing Kids God's Way, and I don't want this to be a big commercial, but it was absolutely foundational for our family. We loved it so much that we facilitated it, because the first time we went through it, we go, God, that was great, and then we'd ask each other, do you remember that part? No. Do you remember that part? No. So we only took away maybe 5–10%, and then we facilitated it, and we took another 5 or 10, and then suddenly we created a family culture based on a lot of the principles that came out of there. And one of those things that took our marriage from, say, a 7 to a 10 was, and that's what I think on a scale of 1 to 10, my whole life is almost a joke. Our family, scale of 1 to 10, how was your day? Scale of 1 to 10, how do you like this thing? So our marriage went from a 7 to a 10 because inside Growing Kids God's Way was this languages of love thing. And if you've run across that concept, it was just fantastic at the time for Liz and I, because we weren't communicating on the same page. And so when I came to find out that she was a quality time and an acts of service, and I was a words of encouragement and physical touch and closeness, those different languages didn't, immediately connect until you sort of reconciled how each person was to act with one another. That piece of information, as it came into our family, was huge for our personal growth and huge for our relationship with our children as to, how do they relate to each other and ourselves. So as I said, life sort of builds on itself. So we had, this moment, and then we had MOPS, and then we had the koinonia, and then we had Growing Kids God's Way, and then, our sphere of friends. So those are the sorts of things that are, I think, critically important to go from my inadequacy as a father into building something where I could start to grow as a person, because, one of those truths that I have come to realize is that you really are where you are because of who you are. In other words, as a father, you can't really lead your family past where you are yourself. You can only take them where you are. And then ultimately, as they grow and leave the house, hopefully they will go past where you are. But you can only take them that far. So that means that you have to take yourself as far as you can. So those are the sorts of things where that's the foundational philosophy. So this talk here that I'm trying to present with you is intentional family character. The thing that became evident as I grew up a little bit was that we wanted to create a character that was different than the character that I grew up with. The character that I grew up with was one of not open, dealing with frustrations in a very closed manner. So that's stake in the ground. I didn't want to be that way. I wanted to have an openness with my wife, an openness with my children, an openness with the world that says, you know what, I'm approachable. And that openness became a foundation for our family. Try before you cry. as you have undoubtedly experienced, if you have little kids, they get some food and it doesn't look like the food that they like, say hot dogs, and they have goulash or something, and they go, well, I am not having that. So that is the beginning of a character issue, right? Are you open to trying new things? Our family was going to be open about trying all things. So Liz coined the phrase, you got to try before you cry. So you're free to cry and get frustrated that we're going to make you eat this, but you have to not just eat it because you're complying with our authority, but you have to develop the spirit of openness. You have to become an open person to new things, new places, new color of cups. So that's the sort of family character, an openness that became very important to our family. It sort of introduces the next stage of development in kids is the perseverance. Now, perseverance in the Bible, and I put it on here, consider it all joy in James, it's been a big element in our family. Consider it all joy because perseverance leads to character development. So as I sort of develop what that thought really is when kids face a situation that it just doesn't, bam, where they hammer it and they've got it and they're an expert at it. How many of those situations are there? Breathing, crying, pooping, they can get those right away. But anything that's a skill takes a little bit of work sometimes. And I remember Shelley, she was approaching her first birthday, and her spirit was, that I can. That's always been her spirit. So she walked up and down a step until she mastered it. That was, great. When she's 12, however, she didn't have that same spirit when it came to playing the piano. Kevin, tying his shoes, his little fingers weren't so dexterous, and so he got frustrated with tying his shoes. And so he would, forget it. I will never tie my shoes. Let's go to Velcro. He didn't say that, but I mean, you can get the idea that the idea of coming upon something, some event, something, some challenge that is too hard initially for a little person, they then run away, they quit. And so the spirit of quitting isn't something that you can take as a parent. No, you can't do that. You got to learn how to tie your shoes. But that is the first stage of this perseverance sort of formula. And then you get to endure. You endure things where you don't quit, but you're not really making progress. You just sort of hunker down, and challenges come your way, and, okay, I'm playing the piano, but I'm not really learning. I'm not really getting after it. So that's to endure, and that's a stage towards persevering. Okay, now I'm starting to discipline myself. I'm not running away. I'm not just sitting there and hanging in there, but I'm persevering. And you can see that as a character, in my head, I just sort of imagine, this fierce storm, and you're just, kind of trudging through the storm in spirit. And so you're doing something about the difficulties that you have, and you're gaining the skills, you're dealing with the challenges, because as we know, every life has its challenges. Every life is going to have challenges. And that openness spirit says, you know what? Challenges are not bad. Challenges are good. They're gifts from God. They bring us well-being, because don't wish things were easier. Wish that you were better. That's the spirit with which you want your kids to have this sort of, take on all challenges kind of spirit. And that was a big part of the Marr family character. And then there's transcend, where you go from quitting to enduring to persevering to transcending. For those of you that may be challenged right now in teaching your kids the ABCs or the 1, 2, 3s, or maybe even math, 2 + 2 is 4. It's a struggle, it's a challenge, and then after a while, they transcend it. It's gone. It's no longer a problem whatsoever. They can tie their shoes, they can make their bed, whatever the momentary challenges, they grow through it, and then they transcend it.